Today we're going to be installing luxury vinyl plank floors. This is a super easy floor to install, and luckily we've got some flooring from Flooret, which is a 6 foot wide or 6 foot long plank by 9 inches wide, so it should make the installation go even quicker. Let's get started. So the first thing with any floor covering is going to be prepping the floor. Now, we've got an area here between the subfloor and the door that is not level. Door is level, the floor is not level. This house was built in the 30s, so we kind of knew that going into it. So what we're gonna be using is this floor leveler and patch, or floor patch and leveler rather, from DAP. This is ready to use, comes in a bucket, and this is good on plywood or concrete, which we've got a mix of the two right here. So we're going to lay this down and kind of trowel it as smooth as possible over this surface to make this all one in the same plane. The nice thing about this product is it's flexible, so that as these subfloors move over time, this should not crack. So we'll go ahead and get that down, and then we'll be ready to start laying that vinyl plank. Okay, so we've got all the floor prep out of the way, and we've got the floor flattened to within 3/16 of an inch over 10 feet, which is the manufacturer specs for this floor. Now, if you're using a different type of floor, it may be a little bit different, so obviously check with your manufacturer specs in that regard. Now, as far as LVP flooring, you're going to want to start in the leftmost corner of a room and work to the right and out. Now, I chose to install this floor along the longest wall in the room, the longest, straightest wall in the room, which is that way. On that side of the room, we've got a bunch of different jogs and some doorways and a stairwell. So I felt like installing from this way over was going to be my best bet. Now, for the first row, I laid that out, I snapped a chalk line, and I got it nice and straight. But what I realized was that after I installed the next couple rows, everything kind of moved. So it was kind of unnecessary to make sure that that first row was nice and straight. What I would suggest after having done this was to install the first 3, maybe 4 rows and get those all nice and locked in place, and then you can kind of move that floor, making sure that you've got your expansion gap, which is a 1/4 inch, which is required by the manufacturer. That way everything is in place, and then you can set a couple of boxes of flooring on this and get something heavy on it, and then continue to work out from there. Now, when it comes to cutting the flooring to length, you can simply just score with a utility knife and snap it. Now, obviously, when you have to make a rip cut or a cut around a doorway or something like that, you're going to want to use a jigsaw or a table saw or something like that, because scoring and snapping long ways is not going to work out that well. Perfect cut. Now, you may have heard me mention expansion gap before, and if you don't know what that is, I'm going to explain it to you right now. Essentially, this vinyl plank floor is completely floating on top of our subfloor, meaning it's not attached to anything, it's not glued or pinned in place with any kind of fastener or anything like that. The reason for that is because this floor needs to be able to expand and contract. With differences in temperature, this floor, as the sun hits it, it might cause it to swell up a little bit and expand a little bit, and you need at least a 1/4 inch all the way around the perimeter of this floor so that it allows for some movement with this floor. Luckily for us, we don't have our baseboards installed yet, so we can run it right up to the drywall within or outside of a 1/4 inch of the drywall, and then cover it up with the baseboard. Now, if you're installing this in an existing space and you don't want to remove your baseboards, you can always add some cove molding or some quarter round to cover up that expansion gap around the perimeter. As far as allowing the floor to expand and contract, you're not going to want to install cabinetry on top of the floor, which is why we had our cabinets installed first, and then we could come back and run the floor up to them. Now, luckily for us, or unlucky, however you want to look at it, our floor is not level. So a lot of our cabinets on this side of the house needed to be shimmed up, which gave us enough space to be able to run the floor underneath of the cabinets. That way we didn't need any quarter round or anything like that. Now, in the areas where the cabinets were installed flush with the floor, or the subfloor rather, we were able to come back with an oscillating tool and cut or back cut the face of those cabinets to allow that expansion gap that we needed underneath of the cabinet. And then when our toe kicks went on, that gap was completely covered up, and we've still got the room for expansions that we needed. The other thing you might run into with this type of flooring, or any flooring for that matter, is running it in or through a doorway. Now, for us, these pre-hung doors were already installed, and this was a fresh floor, so we needed to back cut the pre-hung door jambs and allow the floor to be installed underneath of that jamb, giving us that seamless look while still allowing for expansion and contraction. So the way that we did that was we were able to take a scrap piece of flooring and lay that down beside the door jamb and use an oscillating tool to cut that door jamb out so that our flooring went in nice and tight, not too tight, to the bottom of the door jamb, giving us that seamless look. Okay, so I got my daughter Madison here, and we are laying this floor, and I think we've kind of come up with the best way to do it. So first, you kind of pick this end up and you drop it into the side, right? And then you gently set it down in the groove, and then you tilt this up and you kind of work it in. See, Madison's got hers tight down there. Mine's still a little loose, but what you'll notice is the board is kind of angled up a little bit when it's not fully set into the groove. And I really like this tool. It doesn't look like much, but it's just a block with a little recess on the edge there. That way you can get over top of the lip that's hanging off of the side, and you can just kind of persuade that into place. But you kind of got to lift up on an angle, but you want to make sure that this nose of the board is fully seated. So sometimes having your foot on the edge of that, the front edge, to make sure that that stays in and doesn't come out is a good idea. So see how that lays right down once it's fully in? And if you got any spots, you can just tap them in, and you're good to go. The main level is fairly open, including a living room and kitchen that is all kind of this one open space. However, there was a half bathroom that I needed to lay this floor into, and I didn't really want a transition piece, so I laid it into the floor, and I knew it was going to be easy coming through the doorway, but I needed to backlay about 3 panels into the bathroom, and it worked out pretty well. I needed to remove the existing toilet that was here, and then once I got the wax ring all cleaned up off of the toilet flange, I was able to take the next few planks and then mark those out with a pencil, cut around the flange with a jigsaw, and lay those planks in place by backlaying the tongue into the groove, or whatever you want to call it, one way or the other. I was able to backlay those panels in place without too much extra effort. Once the flooring was down in the half bath, then I was able to insert the new T-bolts in the toilet flange and set our new toilet on top of it with a new wax ring, and the bathroom was back in order. So you've gotten to your last board, or maybe you're in a tight space and you don't have enough room to get the block on the edge of the board and beat it into this joint and seat that board fully into the one previous to that, which is exactly why they make this piece of steel right here. It's essentially a Z-shaped piece of steel. It's got 2 tabs on it, one of which will fit against the edge of the board. You should have enough room for that because of your expansion gap. So that will fit against the edge of the board, and this tab right here is what you'll use for your mallet to be able to hammer that into place, and that will allow you to be able to fully seat that board into the one previous to it. All right, before I get started on the trim, I wanted to hit on a few details of why we chose Flooret. If you don't know about Flooret, they're a direct-to-consumer LVP Flooring Company. And what I mean by that is essentially you purchase the product directly from them, which cuts out the middleman, allowing them to give you a higher quality product for a lesser price. Not only is it cheaper, but you can order a bunch of samples from them and bring them home and check them out based on what you've got going on in your house. And if you want a discount on those, I've got a discount below in the description, so make sure you check that out. Now, what I mean by higher quality is essentially this floor has 3 times the industry standard wear layer, which means that this is going to be super durable. But not only is it durable, it is also 100% waterproof. This being a lake house, this gives us the freedom to walk through here with wet feet and not worry about damaging or leaving stains on the floor. So again, if you want to check out Flooret and all that they have to offer, make sure you hit that link in the description. Okay, so we've got the floor done, and now we're going to be installing some trim around these patio doors. I think the way that I'm going to do this is I've got this little piece of 3/4 inch scrap, and I'm going to use this as a spacer and kind of mark out my reveals. I've already gone ahead and marked this all the way out, all the way around the door. So the trim is going to set 3/4 of an inch in from this edge right here. So I've got this marked at the top corners and then kind of down the bottom. And I went ahead and cut these boards. These are 1x12s because this space right here is about 9 inches. So I've cut those down to length. The top one I went a little bit long on because that one doesn't need to be cut exactly. And these side boards are gonna kind of butt up into that. So now the problem that I'm having is that I said that it was about 9 inches. The problem is, like down here in this corner is 9 1/4, and then up here is a little bit less than 9. So it's a little bit, you know, with the drywall, it's not perfectly straight. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get these boards in place, and then I'll just trace the top and the outsides of the board, and I'll have to kind of rip those down on the table saw to match the contour of the wall itself. So one of these, the right hand side, is a little bit shorter than the other side. I'm gonna try and basically just prop these up and put this board, which is the top board, up in here. So I'm essentially just gonna scribe this into the contour of the wall. And then that is gonna give us that line that I need to cut, which as you can see is much bigger up there and smaller above. All right, so we've got the sides and the top, they're cut and ready to go be installed. But what I'm gonna do is I've actually gone ahead and marked everything so I know which way the door is, which way the top is, and I have taken this board, me and Jamie just took it and put it up and marked where my marks were on the top of the door. And now essentially I'm just gonna use a square, and that will be the inside of this board. And the way that we're going to attach this all together is I'm going to drill some pocket holes in the top outside of the board so they're hidden, and then we'll attach it to this top board, and then we'll put it in place, shim it, and screw it. All right, so I've got the trim in place, and I've already gone ahead and put one screw in there, but the screws that I'm using are these 2.5 inch trim head screws. And the nice thing about these are they have these reverse threads at the top of the screw, which essentially gives you the ability to kind of move that wood where you need it to be. So like right now, I'm a little low in the middle, and there's no shims in there, but these screws will hold it until I get my shims in there. So I'm gonna put a screw up through the board. Now obviously my line is way down here, so I can just back this screw out until I get right on that line, and then that board is secure in place. It's not gonna go anywhere. Now my theory is, instead of using shims, so I'll put a bunch of these screws in, not a bunch, but enough, and then I'll come back in with some window foam that doesn't expand too much to fill up that void, and then I'll have a nice solid backing behind this board that will fill it all up nice and evenly instead of using shims. Won't bow or warp frames and jambs. Okay, so when it comes to trim, I am like an 80-20 guy. I like to have nice looking trim, but I don't like to spend a lot of time doing it. So I've kind of come up with what I think is my own trim style, but essentially it's a Craftsman look with a lot easier way to do it. So the way that I achieve that is I cut these plinth blocks, which are 5/4. This is 5/4. Windsor 1 is the type of product that it is, but essentially it's pine, finger jointed pine, 5/4 board. And I cut those down to 4 inches by 6 1/4. And the key there is that these get secured at the bottom of the door frame. And then when I put my vertical trim on this 1x4, the nice thing about this is there are no matching corners, so nothing has to match up perfectly. If you got a cheat one, a little one way or the other way, it's okay because you don't have to match up seams and whatnot. So you've got these different variations in thicknesses as well as widths, and then the baseboard is just going to be a 1x6, which is 5.5 inches. It's going to drop down a little bit, and that will butt up into this, a 3/4 board. So you'll have, again, a variation in the thickness and the height of the baseboard, and everything works out really nicely. So we're gonna go ahead and secure that plinth block on both sides. We'll measure for the 1x4s that go up the sides and cut those to length, and then we'll cap the top of it with a 5/4 by 6, and that'll kind of give us that Craftsman look with a lot less work. Okay, so I ran into a little problem. Essentially, I've got this wood here, and then there's a stud here, or the window buck that we put in. The problem is that when I fasten these, this kind of came out a little bit. It just felt a little loose over here on this side. So in order to fix that, I'm gonna put some construction adhesive, which we're gonna be using the DAP HD Max, their construction adhesive, to go on the back of this plinth block. And essentially, this will be glued to the wall, and we should be good to go from there. All right, so when I'm measuring for the vertical boards, essentially I want an 1/8 inch reveal on the top and the sides. So I'm going to measure from the bottom or the top of the plinth block up to this joint right there, which is 6 feet and 1/16. I'm gonna add an 1/8 of an inch to that, which is gonna give me 72 inches and 3/16. We'll get that cut and installed with some brad nails. Should be good to go. Okay, so like I said before, we've got the 5/4 by 6, which is actually 5.5 inches by 1 inch thick material for the header. And what I do is I measure from the outside of the 1x4s, and then I add an inch. That'll give me a 1/2 inch of overhang on both sides. Now the problem is when you attach these, usually you've got a 2x here behind the drywall, which is our window buck in this case, and then you've got the trim to nail to. So you've got these 2 points to secure. Well, I've done this before, and I know that up here, if this board starts to cup, this top half of this board will pull away from the wall. I've seen it happen before. So what I like to do is before I install this, I'll just lay a bead of this construction adhesive, which is again the HD Max from DAP, and we'll just go right across the top of this board, and that way that will glue that to that drywall and give us a little bit more security as far as installing this board and make sure it doesn't move. Give ourselves that 1/2 inch overhang here. Should match the other side. And then I've just got 2-inch 18 gauge brad nails. When it came to filling the nail holes or any of those little small trim head screw holes, we opted to use painter's putty, which is usually my go-to just because it's super easy to work with and it paints up really well. When it comes to caulking in the trim, I typically like to use Extreme Stretch from DAP, and the reason being is because if there's any movement in that trim, this is going to be able to stretch up to 600%, making sure that you get that nice crack-proof seal. Now, while DAP does recommend using a tool to smooth it out, unfortunately we can never find those things, so we opted to just use our finger instead. But whichever the case, make sure that you have a cup of water handy so that you can dip that tool or your finger in it and make sure you get a nice smooth caulk line. So this is the fun part of the process. The floor is in and it is really, really exciting to see because it's exactly the look and the style that we were wanting in this house, but it also gives us the durability that we're going to need going forward in a house like this. Now, it's hard to believe what we've come from the original space that this was to what it is now, and I'm super excited about the progress and a lot more to come. If you want more details on all the steps that it took to get here, including lifting the house and moving the staircase, I've got a lot of those videos out on my channel as well, so make sure you check those out. Until next time, be safe and happy building.